The night had been quiet, the kind of calm Angela Morris treasured after a long day of work. The lake shimmered under the moonlight, frogs croaked in the distance, and a soft breeze rustled the trees. She sat on her porch in her rocking chair, boots crossed at the ankles, sipping sweet tea and enjoying the silence. She had worked all her life for this peace, 20 years of chasing fugitives, standing in courtrooms, writing reports until her eyes burned. Finally, she had bought this lakeside cabin with her savings, far enough from the chaos of the city, but close enough to reach in case of an emergency. It was supposed to be a fresh start, a home away from constant noise and flashing lights, but ever since she had moved in, there had been one source of trouble: the Homeowners Association, run by a woman named Karen Whitmore. Karen was the type who lived to wield authority over her neighbors. She patrolled the subdivision like a self-declared queen, writing complaints about lawn heights, mailbox paint, even the color of welcome mats. When Angela first moved in, Karen had marched right up to her with a clipboard in hand and the kind of smile that wasn't a smile at all. "You know this neighborhood has standards," Karen had said, eyeing Angela's pickup truck with distaste. "Try to maintain a certain appearance here." Angela, wearing her sheriff's ball cap and unloading boxes at the time, had simply replied, "Good to know. I'll keep that in mind." She didn't mention her job because she didn't feel she needed to. She was a resident like everyone else, and she wasn't about to pull rank to silence a nosy neighbor. But Karen hadn't stopped there. She started filing complaints. One about the wind chimes Angela hung on her porch too loud. Another about the boots Angela left by her front door unsightly. Da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And another about Angela's dog barking at night, disturbing the peace, though the dog barked only when Karen walked past, peering into the windows. Angela ignored the nonsense, until one day she found an envelope in her mailbox, stamped with the HOA letterhead. It read, "If you cannot abide by the neighborhood standards, you will be asked to leave." Angela had laughed out loud when she read it, but beneath her laughter was a spark of irritation. Now, she'd dealt with plenty of bullies in her life, but few were as petty as this one. Still, she decided to keep her cool. She wasn't just Angela the homeowner, she was also Angela the sheriff. And she knew better than to escalate a petty feud. But Karen wasn't done. That evening, Angela noticed Karen lurking at the edge of the cul-de-sac, whispering to two other HOA board members. They glanced at Angela's porch, scribbled notes, and disappeared into Karen's house. Angela shook her head, muttering, "These people don't know what real problems look like." At the time the sun dipped low and the stars came out, Angela was back in her rocking chair. Her dog, Duke, lay at her feet, tail thumping lazily. She had just taken a sip of tea when she saw the headlights. Two patrol cars barreled into the subdivision, sirens cutting through the calm, tires screeching as they stopped in front of her property. Angela didn't move. She recognized the way the officers jumped out of their vehicles' hands, hovering. Near holsters, voices raised in command. She had trained officers to move like that. "Ma'am, step away from the porch," one shouted, flashlight blinding her eyes. Angela calmly set her glass down and stood, shielding her face from the light. "And who exactly do you think I am?" "We got a call about trespassing," the officer said firmly. "Here, this isn't your property." Angela tilted her head, biting back a laugh. "Trespassing? On my own porch?" The officer glanced back at Karen, who had emerged from behind the patrol cars, arms folded smugly. "That's her, Karen. Declared, I've told her before she doesn't belong here. She refuses to follow the rules. You need to remove her." Angela's jaw tightened, though she kept her tone calm. She studied the officers, young, nervous, clearly caught between a neighbor's accusation and the calm confidence of the woman in front of them. They expected fear, maybe shouting, maybe pleading. Instead, Angela crossed her arms and leaned against the porch railing. "Remove me," she said, her voice carrying just enough authority to make them hesitate. "Why don't you come a little closer and try that?" The younger of the two officers blinked, suddenly unsure. He looked at his partner, who gave a half-shrug. Their training told them one thing, but something in Angela's demeanor told them another. She wasn't acting like someone guilty. She wasn't acting like someone caught. She was acting like someone in control. "Ma'am," the older officer. "Try it again. Softer this time. We just need to see some ID. If you live here, we'll clear this up." Angela reached into her jacket pocket slowly, her movements deliberate. Karen's smirk widened. Convinced she was about to prove her point that the woman on the porch was just another rule breaker. Another outsider who didn't belong in her perfect neighborhood. But when Angela pulled out her leather badge, wallet, and flipped it open, the gold star gleamed under the porch light. Sheriff Angela Maurice, elected law enforcement officer of the entire county. The air shifted instantly. The younger officer froze, his mouth opening slightly as he realized exactly who he was speaking to. The older one straightened, his face flushing red with embarrassment. Karen blinked rapidly, her smirk collapsing into shock. Angela's voice was calm but sharp as a blade. "You just tried to arrest the county sheriff in her own home. You got called out here for suspicious activity, and instead of questioning the source, you came in with sirens blazing. Now, which part of this sounds like good policing to you?" The younger officer stammered, "Sheriff, we didn't. No, we were just responding to a call." Angela snapped the badge shut and slid it back into her pocket. "And that's the problem. You let yourselves be weaponized. You let yourselves be used to harass me because this woman," she gestured toward Karen, who was frozen in place, "doesn't like who her neighbor is. That ends tonight." Karen finally found her voice, though it came out shaky. "I didn't know. I didn't know who you were, Angela." Cut her off, her eyes narrowing. "You didn't need to know who I was. You needed to know that what you were doing was wrong. Since you clearly don't, I'll be correcting that mistake very soon."
Nice.
Silence was thick. The officer shifted uncomfortably, waiting for Angela's next words. Karen, who had been certain she was about to win, now stood on the edge of panic. Realizing just how badly she had miscalculated, Angela stepped down from the porch, her boots thudding against the wood. She stopped just a few feet from Karen, her presence towering even though she hadn't raised her voice once. "You wanted to play games?" she said quietly enough for only Karen and the officers to hear. "But you picked the wrong person to mess with." Then turning to the officers, she dismissed them with a wave of her hand. "I'll handle this from here. Q." The officers nodded quickly, retreating to their cars, grateful to be out of the mess. Karen stood trembling, her power completely gone, and the neighbors watching from their windows knew something monumental had just shifted. Angela walked back, up her porch steps, sat down in her rocking chair, and picked up her glass of tea. She took a long sip, never taking her eyes off Karen, who finally turned and scurried back into her house. The sheriff smiled faintly to herself. The game had only just begun. The next morning, the neighborhood was alive with whispers. Windows that had been cracked open during the flashing of sirens were now buzzing with gossip. Angela could feel the shift in the air when she took Duke for his morning walk. The people who had once looked at her with suspicion now greeted her cautiously, almost nervously, as if they'd been caught doing something wrong. Word traveled fast, and everyone seemed to know that the woman they had thought of as just another resident was, in fact, the elected sheriff of the entire county. Angela didn't gloat. She simply walked her dog, nodded at her neighbors, and went about her morning like usual. Beneath her calm exterior, she was already thinking several steps ahead. She knew Karen well enough to understand this wouldn't be over. Bullies rarely backed down after a single loss. They scrambled, schemed, and tried to regain ground any way they could. And sure enough, she didn't have to wait long. By that afternoon, Angela received an email from the HOA board summoning her to an urgent meeting that evening. The subject line read, "Violation of community rules and abuse of authority." Angela let out a laugh so sharp that Duke, lounging at her feet, lifted his head. "They really don't learn, do they?" She muttered. The meeting was held in the neighborhood's clubhouse, a wide, overly air-conditioned space with beige walls and uncomfortable folding chairs. When Angela arrived, dressed in casual clothes but carrying her badge and service pistol at her side, it was part of her uniform. After all, every head in the room turned. Conversations cut off mid-sentence, and the board members, seated at a long table in front, shifted uneasily. Karen, however, looked smug again, like she had somehow regained her confidence overnight. Was dressed in her crisp white blouse and pearl necklace, her posture screaming superiority. "Sheriff Maurice," Karen said with false sweetness, emphasizing the title as though mocking it. "Thank you for coming. Please, have a seat." Angela didn't sit. She crossed her arms and looked at the group. "I was told this meeting was urgent. Let's hear it." Karen's smile grew wider. "As you know, this is a community governed by rules that you have, unfortunately, disregarded. Last night's display, involving law enforcement, was disruptive to our neighborhood. Several families complained about being frightened by the police presence." Angela raised an eyebrow. "The police presence, you called?" Karen's smile twitched but didn't falter. "Regardless, it caused unnecessary panic. Furthermore, it's been noted that you have repeatedly failed to comply with HOA regulations. Your wind chimes, your truck, even the boots left on your porch. This behavior shows a disregard for the standards we uphold." Angela chuckled, low. "And dangerous. So let me get this straight. You harassed me, called in officers under false pretenses, tried to have me removed from my own home, and now you're accusing me of misconduct because my wind chimes are too loud." One of the board members, a balding man who had been avoiding eye contact, cleared his throat. "Let's keep things civil, please." Angela's eyes locked on him. "Civil. You let her weaponize the police against me last night. Do you have any idea what that means? What that could have escalated into? If I weren't who I am, if I didn't have this badge—" She pulled it from her jacket pocket and slammed it on the table. At the metal clattering loudly, that encounter could have ended very differently, and you all would have been complicit. Room was silent. Some board members glanced at one another nervously, while others avoided Angela's eyes altogether. Karen finally spoke. "We're not here to discuss hypotheticals. We're here because you think being sheriff puts you above the rules. This community has expectations, and you," Angela stepped closer to the table, her presence filling the room.
Yes.
"Something very clear. My position doesn't put me above the rules. It puts me in charge of enforcing the law. And what you did last night, Karen, was criminal. Filing a false police report, misuse of emergency resources, harassment hits, all punishable under county law. You thought you could intimidate me into leaving, but you picked the wrong target." Gasps rippled through the small audience that had gathered at the back of the room. Angela could see neighbors who weren't on the board, but had come out of curiosity. Their faces showed something new, now not suspicion, but support. Karen sputtered. You can't threaten me. It's abuse of authority." Angela smirked. "It's not a threat. It's a promise. I've already documented everything that happened last night. If I so much as get another false complaint or harassment from you, I'll press charges. And believe me, I've taken down people a lot scarier than you." One of the other board members, a middle-aged woman who had clearly grown tired of Karen's antics, spoke up softly. "She's right, Karen. This has gone too far." Karen whipped, her head toward her, eyes wide with betrayal. "You're siding with her?" The woman sighed. "I'm siding with what's right. You've made this neighborhood miserable for years. Last night crossed a line." Angela didn't need to say more. She could see the tide turning right there in the room. Board members who had once feared Karen's wrath now looked ashamed of. Standing behind her, neighbors in the back whispered to one another, their expressions shifting as they realized who had truly been the problem all along. Karen, desperate and red-faced, slammed her palm on the table. "This is my neighborhood. I built this community. She doesn't belong here, and if you all had any backbone, you'd stand with me." Angela leaned in, her voice quiet but cutting. "It's not your neighborhood. It's mine too. And unlike you, I protect everyone in it, not just the ones who fit your idea of belonging." For a long moment, the room was silent. Karen's chest heaved with rage, but no one came to her defense. Finally, the balding man spoke again, his tone hesitant but firm. I think we need to reconsider Karen's position on this board. She's caused more division than unity." Murmurs of agreement followed. Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. "Can't do this to me. I am the HOA." Angela straightened, her badge glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Not anymore. You're not." By the time Angela left the clubhouse, Karen was still shouting, her words drowned out by the voices of neighbors rising against her. The sheriff walked calmly to her truck, Duke waiting patiently inside, and drove back to her cabin. She knew. It wasn't completely over people like Karen never quit easily. But the balance had shifted, and the power she once wielded like a weapon was slipping from her grasp. Angela sat on her porch again that evening, the sun setting in streaks of orange and purple over the lake. She rocked slowly in her chair, Duke resting his head on her boot, and thought about how quickly things could change. In 24 hours, the neighborhood had gone from suspicion and hostility to respect and support. All it had taken was one night, one confrontation, for people to finally see the truth. And deep down, Angela knew that the real reckoning was still to come. Karen wouldn't slink away quietly. She'd try one more time to regain control, but Angela was ready. She'd spent her whole life facing down people who thought power gave them the right to trample others. And every time she'd proven the same point, justice would always win. Karen's rage didn't die down after the board meeting. If anything, it burned hotter. For someone like her used to commanding fear and obedience with nothing more than a sneer, it was intolerable to be humiliated in front of the very people she'd lorded over for years. That night, while most of the neighborhood slept in uneasy silence after the dramatic showdown, Karen paced her immaculate kitchen with a glass of white wine clutched in one hand. Her pearls, still strung around her neck from the meeting, reflected the cold overhead light as she whispered to herself about betrayal, about snakes on the board, about the outsider who had dared to dismantle her power. Angela, meanwhile, slept soundly in her cabin. Years of military service and long nights as a sheriff had taught her the value of rest when the storm hadn't fully passed yet. She knew Karen wouldn't give up easily, but she also knew she had time. People like Karen thrived on dramatics, on gossip and manipulation. They struck fast, but rarely struck smart. Angela trusted that when the final act came, she'd be ready. Next morning, Angela woke to an unusual sound, a knock at her door. Duke barked once and patted over, ears up but not aggressive. Angela opened the door to find a young couple standing awkwardly on her porch. They lived a few houses down. Angela recognized them from passing waves during walks. The woman, a petite brunette, wrung her hands nervously, while the man shifted his weight from foot to foot. "Sheriff Morris," the woman began softly, We just wanted to thank you for last night, for standing up to Karen." Angela gave a polite nod, motioning for them to continue. "She's made life miserable here," the man added, adding people about every little thing, finding folks over grass height, even threatening to have someone's car towed because their bumper had a scratch, but nobody ever had the guts to stand up to her. Angela leaned against the doorframe, crossing her arms. Bullies thrive when no one pushes back. She picked the wrong target this time. The couple exchanged a look before the woman lowered her voice. "We just thought you should know. We heard Karen talking on the phone last night. She was outside yelling on her patio. Something about calling in a favor. Something about how she was going to put you in your place." Angela's jaw tightened. She had suspected Karen would make one last desperate move, but hearing it confirmed lit a new edge of focus in her mind. She thanked the couple, assured them she'd handle it, and sent them off with a calm smile. But inside, she was already running through scenarios. By noon, the neighborhood buzzed again. This time, it wasn't gossip, but outright commotion. A few houses down from Angela's, several sheriff's deputies had shown up in squad cars. Angela's own people, summoned under what she quickly discovered was another false complaint. Karen had filed a report claiming Angela was dangerous, unstable, and stockpiling weapons illegally in her home. It was an audacious lie, but Karen had dressed it up with just enough theatrics to get attention. Angela drove up as her deputies were stepping out of their vehicles. They froze when they saw her at the wheel. She parked calmly, got out, and walked straight up to them, her badge glinting in the sun. "Gentlemen," she said evenly, "what's the call?" One of the deputies, a younger officer still trying to mask his nervousness, cleared his throat. Sheriff, we got a report of illegal weapons on the property." Name on the complaint was Karen Whitfield. Angela let out a sharp laugh. Of course it was. She pulled her badge fully into view. You all know where I stand. Every weapon I own is registered and accounted for. If you want, I'll let you verify it yourselves. You should also know this. Filing a false report is a crime, and Mrs. Whitfield has now done it twice in less than 24 hours. The deputies exchanged uneasy glances. They weren't used to being caught in the middle of HOA drama, much less one involving their own boss. Finally, the youngest spoke. Again, his voice steadier now. Sheriff, with all due respect, we'll file this under false reporting. Again, Angela nodded. Good. And I'll handle Karen personally. Word spread faster than wildfire. By evening, nearly the entire community knew that Karen had tried to sic law enforcement on Angela again, this time by fabricating dangerous accusations. But instead of rallying behind her, the neighbors began openly voicing their anger. Emily's, who had been too intimidated to speak before now, whispered loudly about Karen's abuses. By dusk, a group of residents stood outside the clubhouse demanding an emergency vote to remove her from the board. Karen, however, wasn't ready to let go. She stormed into the gathering in a fit of fury, waving papers and shouting about lawsuits and defamation. She accused Angela of manipulating the neighborhood, of using her badge to silence opposition, of orchestrating a witch hunt. Her shrill voice carried across the street. Drawing even more onlookers, Angela walked into the crowd quietly, Duke trotting at her side. She didn't shout, she didn't need to. When she stepped into the center of the circle, all eyes turned. Toward her, Karen, Angela said, her tone calm but firm. You've abused your position. You've lied. You've put people in danger. Okay. And last night, when you called the police on me, you risked turning this neighborhood into a scene of tragedy. You knew exactly what you were doing. Karen's face twisted. You don't belong. Here, you never did. This community was fine until you moved in with your truck, your dog, your attitude. It was protecting the standards we built. Angela shook her head. You weren't protecting standards. You were protecting your control. And the truth is, you've been hurting this community for years. They see it now. They see you. A murmur of agreement rose from the crowd. One resident shouted, "We're done with you, Karen." Another added, "We don't need a tyrant running this place." Karen's eyes darted wildly, searching for support. But no one stepped forward. The board members she'd once bullied into submission avoided her gaze. The neighbors she'd fined and berated now stood united against her. For the first time, Karen realized she was truly alone. Angela stepped closer, lowering her voice so that only Karen could hear, though the crowd was silent enough to catch every word. I should arrest you right now. Do false reports, harassment, attempted misuse of law enforcement resources. I'd be well within my rights. But here's the thing. Sometimes the worst punishment isn't jail. Sometimes it's losing the one thing you cling to most. And tonight, that's exactly what's happening. The crowd erupted in applause as one of the board members announced that an emergency vote would be held immediately. Within minutes, ballots were filled, counted. The result was unanimous. Karen was removed from the HOA board. Karen stood frozen, her face pale beneath the clubhouse lights. She opened her mouth to scream again, but the sound died in her throat when she saw the eyes of her neighbors, all of them, united, unafraid. Angela turned to leave Duke at her side. As she walked away, she glanced back once. Karen was still, standing there, clutching her papers, pearls trembling around her neck, stripped of the power she had wielded like a weapon. That night, Angela returned to her porch. The lake shimmered under the moonlight. For the first time since she'd moved in, she felt the neighborhood truly quiet. No sirens, no shouting, no fear. Just peace. Duke nudged her hand with his nose, and Angela smiled, scratching behind his ears. "It's over, buddy," she whispered. "She's finished." The next morning, a sign went up on Karen's pristine lawn, "House for sale." The community never saw her again. Angela, on the other hand, became more than just their neighbor. She became their protector, their voice of reason, and a reminder that justice doesn't bow to intimidation. And as the seasons changed and the neighborhood settled into a new sense of unity, people would sometimes glance at the cabin by the lake, grateful that the sheriff had chosen their street to call home, because when Karen tried to break her, she had instead broken herself, and that was the real end of the story.